Hi, everyone. So today we will talk about the opportunity of AI. So I'm Edward Chan. I'm a portfolio manager of a tech thematic fund, and I'm also an analyst covering global semiconductor and also the tech in general. So first of all, I'll just give a brief introduction to our company's background. So Mirae, as a global investment, has been founded since 1997. So globally, we manage around 198 billion US dollars of asset. And in terms of ETF, we have a broad spectrum of different investment strategies. And our ETF asset under management is around 80 billion US dollars. And so we will start with ChatGPT, obviously being a very hot topic in the news. So we just sort of go through briefly what it is and really what that means to the industry in terms of impact in software and also hardware, especially in semiconductor. So ChatGPT is a large language model. It has been trained using a lot of text, whether it's from internet or other sources. So actually, if you look at ChatGPT, it didn't came out of the blue at the end of last year. So OpenAI have been doing a lot of work on language models, and there's been GPT-1, 2, 3, and then eventually 3.5 is the version that really gained a lot of traction because it was released to the general public. But if you track the industry over the years, you will see that this has actually been a gradual process where these models gradually, as you can see on the chart at the bottom left, gradually grow in size and the number of parameters that they use, and also just the amount of data that companies use to train these models. And eventually, at some point, the model reach a stage where you're able to actually perform some of the tasks that people do. I think that's where it's been able to gain this traction at such a short period of time, right? So if you look at the chart on this right, a lot of the other very popular apps or other different platforms, this is the number of months that they took to reach 1 million users. But if you look at ChatGPT, it's only took ChatGPT 2 months to reach 1 million users. So that's really never been seen before in terms of just how fast they reach this wide global reach. And so we've mentioned it's a natural language model. So this type of model is also actually already exists in our daily life. So even a lot of the translation applications that we use, things like Google Translate and a lot of different functions of translation software and text that we've used, at the back of that, supporting that is also this type of language processing model, natural language model. And also, if you think back at a lot of the chatbots that we actually already have, going from Alexa from Amazon and also Siri from Apple. So these techniques didn't come, as I said before, not something that came out overnight. It's been a gradual process, and actually natural language model has been embedded in many of the tech that we use on a day-to-day basis. But what has changed over the past few years is really the size and scale of these models. And in a later bit, we'll talk a little bit about how the infrastructure and how the development in semiconductor allow companies to train models this size, and also to make the costs feasible, the time and the costs feasible for us to train models at this size. And the size results in obviously the performance that has really shocked the world. So just going back a little bit on OpenAI's history. So as we know, it was founded as more of a non-profit organization, and then later on they sort of changed the entity to allow it to accept more outside investment. So they've received the first investment from Microsoft in 2019. So if you think about AI and in terms of how startups approach AI, given that we mentioned before, these type of models are very large in size, and it's actually quite costly to train them, and it takes time and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of money investing in semiconductor and servers to train these models. So it's actually quite difficult for a small startup with limited resources to be able to train models of this size. So we can see how sort of Microsoft over the years have invested quite a bit in OpenAI, and also that partnership makes sense for OpenAI with Microsoft, because Microsoft has a sizable cloud business where they have a lot of computing resources already available to sort of collaborate, and where OpenAI can leverage that resources and to try to manage the cost really for them to train a model this scale. And so coming out of this partnership, not just the launch of ChatGPT, but we've seen Microsoft is rapidly integrating a lot of the capabilities of ChatGPT into their products. So you from search to Office to just a range of Microsoft software products, we're seeing they're doing software development very rapidly to essentially bring the capability of ChatGPT, of these large models into the software that they offer. So I think this would definitely be a race in the industry, in all different kinds of software, to start to enable them connect them with this type of AI capability. And essentially, the companies that are not able to catch up and not able to offer this type of capability will end up with inferior software for the users. So it's really now a race to compete and to really think about software development in a very different way. And you have to incorporate AI capability, whatever you can, into the software that you offer. So let's talk a little bit more about search. So we mentioned that with the collaboration with OpenAI, Microsoft is trying to revamp their search product. So if we look at the market, Google has really dominated the search market. So here is the chart of US search engine market share in 2022. So we see close to 90% market share in the US. And if you look at the global numbers, it's not really that far off. So essentially look at Microsoft's Bing, only 7% market share, and then Yahoo at 3%. It's a very, very low market share in the search engine in the US, the similar type of dynamic globally as well. There's really been a market that's dominated by Google over the years. So for Microsoft going into this market, they have not much to lose in terms of the risk that they're taking in changing the products and changing the way they look at search. So if we go back a little bit and think about how AI will change search, in the previous model, search engines are very good at ranking the search results, right? And then the sort of revenue generating model, essentially, we have to go into the result and explore different options. And then as we spend time there are also the ads that are relevant to our search results. And so the time we spend exploring the search result actually generated a revenue opportunity for ads to be sold in this context. But as we move on to AI-enabled search becomes much more accurate, and also a lot more is done before the moment when we see the result, right? So essentially now you're able to ask the search engine to do a lot more, essentially to do one more step to already help you look at the results, rank the results, go into whatever you're searching, and pull out the information that you need. So that really changes everything, because it cut out a lot of the time that you otherwise would have been spending exploring the different results and potentially clicking into ads That really changes the whole dynamic. However, for Google, it's hard to sort of react to this, given that as your sort of AI-enabled search model gains traction, that actually does also eat away your conventional search engine and how it operates. But for Microsoft, they really have nothing to lose, given that they already have very low market share in the search market, and their core business don't really rely on search for their cash flow. So they're much bolder in terms of product innovation and how they're willing to challenge and to launch new products and new formats to disrupt this market. So we also look at China and the companies that are working on these type of large language models in China. And so in China, large sort of internet companies and also hyperscalers like Baidu, Baba, Tencent, ByteDance. So they're all working on some type of a large language model. So we think that the hyperscalers naturally are sort of more better positioned to sort of enter and invest and play in this area, because as we mentioned earlier, AI requires a sort of significant investment in the infrastructure, and you really need to have the scale and size in your data center, in your training facilities, to be able to afford to train these type of large models. And we think without that type of infrastructure, essentially, it's very hard to have a competitive model compared to your peers. So it's really, at this stage of the game, it's asset heavy, capital intensive competition. So it's no longer a sort of software development setup. Like if you think about 15 years ago, when you're entering the mobile internet, where a small team, maybe 10, 20 people are able to, develop software or develop apps that can gain a lot of traction and still be very competitive. But we think in the AI era, especially for large model type application, it's very hard for companies that doesn't have enough capital and size to compete, because it's no longer asset light business model, and you have to at the start invest in a lot in the computing power that will allow you to train these models. And it's really the infrastructure, the data that you can get your hands on, and the training that determine how good your model can be, right? So there are certain scenarios like autonomous driving where data is the scarce resource, right? So where you have to collect the data, have a labeled data, have usable data, and where that's a scarce resource that is already very hard to get, on top of the sort of training facilities that you need to invest in. I think in the case of the language model, in this type of language generative AI, data is not really a problem, because you are able to leverage a lot of the internet data and different types of text data out there. So that's not really the bottleneck here, but it's more the technique that you use to train them, how efficiently you can train them, also the infrastructure that you're able to invest in, the hardware that you can get your hands on. So in China, we don't really see a clear lead now in terms of who is leading the market. We think everybody is really trying their way to build a similar type of language model, and there are a wide sort of variety of application we see on the right of this chart. We have here, there are really many different types of scenario that you can use, from search to sort of different product discovery and to logistics. So there are all types of scenario that companies can leverage. So we think it will be, again, a sort of race in China for companies to innovate on product development and figure out their business model. So we think at the end of the day, for AI, it really comes down to how you're able to build products with AI, right? So I think if you look at Google, they actually had the capabilities for many years. They had the infrastructure. They also trained similar type of model. But when you're not able to translate that capability into products and then products into profit, um, as an investor, it's a bit too slow and it doesn't not meaningful um, research. So at the end of the day, AI needs to be you need to have actual impact on with what you're doing in the R&D and in your investment in AI. So it really comes down to um, are you able to build a competitive product with AI, and then at the end of the day, are you able to monetize what you're building? And so here we get a little bit deeper into the semiconductor side of AI. So we mentioned that um, a lot of AI relies quite heavily on training, right? So in training, you have to invest in the semiconductor infrastructure. So we look at the types of computing, the amount of computing power that AI models required over the years. You can see from the 90s to 2000 to 2020. So really the size of the model and the amount of computing power that these AI models require are growing very rapidly, right? So that is really enabled by the development of semiconductor technology, and that really, as you increase the transistor density and along with other improvements, they have really lowered the cost for training large models, and has lowered the cost for per computing unit. And so in this type of workload, GPU is quite widely used in training AI models. And so we look at the mix of the amount of different types of chips that companies now invest. We can see in 2021, so roughly the server processor market for semiconductor is roughly a 34 billion US dollar market. And we can see that across different type of application on the chart here. The orange part, a lot of it is CPU, right? So CPU has been in the center stage for 30, 40 years in computing, where it is the main investment in the hyperscaler and also in a lot of the consumer electronics products. But over time, we've arrived at the age of AI, where the type of compute we do is different now, right? So with this type of AI, large AI language model training or other AI model training, you need to use a lot more parallel compute, where GPU does a much better job in this type of workload. So what's changing is that in your hyperscaler and in a lot of your data center, the amount of GPU usage will go up a lot, because all these models will have to use a lot more GPU to train, and essentially a lot of your workload will share of GPU will go up. So we can see here by 2027, overall it will grow to over 100 billion US dollar industry, and then the mix of GPU will also go up quite significantly. And so here, from McKinsey's estimate, AI may bring more than 85 billion US dollars of incremental profits to the semiconductor industry in the long run. So essentially, we talked a lot about how AI is really a capital-intensive industry, right? So when you think capital-intensive, in other industries, you're thinking steel, concrete, we're building bridges, we're building houses, right? And that type of investment. And really, in the digital world, and in this era of large AI models, the infrastructure and where you need to invest your capital is that semiconductor. So majority of your investment will be in the semiconductor, in the chips, in GPU and other types of maybe ASIC and other types of computing. So semiconductor is really the sector that's benefiting from this surge of infrastructure investment for AI. So which is why we see the sort of over time, the long-term potential and the long-term impact for the sector, because if you want to build all these large models and then all the other products that are related to these large models, you have to first invest in the infrastructure that allow you to train them. So then coming to just the overall semiconductor industry, so we can see that computing and data storage is the largest segment in semi, and on top of that, there's a number of other end applications like your wireless communication, auto, industrial, and consumer. So it's worth noting that even in auto, right, where it's one of the fastest growing segment in semi, it will also see significant impact from AI as autonomous driving is developing quite rapidly, right? So in autonomous driving, there's a lot of AI technique that needs to be adopted to enable this application. So all of your vision models and how you interpret the camera signals, all of that data requires AI model to be trained and also to deploy in driving. So autonomous driving is another area where AI will make a significant impact, and that will have that will have a lot of implications for semiconductor, because one, you also need data center to build that capability to train these models in once you collect the data and you label your data, and once you have a ready trained model on the vehicle, you also need to have a pretty powerful chip to actually deploy these models and do a lot of the computation on the vehicle. So AI will also, as autonomous driving penetration goes up in the future, have a very positive impact on the demand of semiconductor and the content of semiconductor on vehicles. And earlier we've talked a lot about how AI impacting the demand for semiconductor and computing and also data storage, right? So coming to data as well, because the size of the models that we mentioned, and also just the speed, the bandwidth that you need to have to train this model has a pretty large impact on memory as well. So the spec of memory that you use in these servers, for AI servers, you have to use HBM memory, and then also just in terms of comparing to a standard server, the memory content also go up by quite a lot. And if you look at the type of visual data that we use to train in the autonomous driving segment, that is also another area where the sort of data consumption is very sizable. So overall, structurally, it's also positive for memory demand as well. So here, we just want to talk a little bit about how the sort of development of semiconductor enable the performance improvement, right? So we see that on the right is NVIDIA's product roadmap and how they essentially have launching a new chip every 2 years. And partnering with TSMC, so NVIDIA's chip or Apple's chip are all produced at TSMC, whereas you continue to shrink the transistor size and pack more transistor into one chip until they are leveraging TSMC's new platforms to build a chip, right? So over time, that has allowed them to build more powerful chips and on a per sort of computing unit basis, cheaper chips, and also more power efficient chips. And that's helped companies lower the cost of their training and allow them to invest and train much more powerful models over time. So here, we just want to highlight how that impacts Asia's semiconductor companies. So we see that globally, actually, the manufacturing capacity have shifted by location in semiconductor. A lot of it has shifted to Asia. So we see that in the 90s, majority of that capacity is in the US, Europe, and Japan, that essentially almost make up all of the capacity globally. And by now, a lot of that capacity has shifted to Asia, where US and Europe combine to be less than 30% of the global semiconductor capacity. So what happened here is really more of a division of labor, where a lot of the HPC chip design companies are US, and then they outsourcing the manufacturing to foundries like TSMC and Samsung in Asia. And so for the AI trend, Asia companies are playing a very important role in manufacturing these chips. And with this type of manufacturing is also not something that's maybe in people's mind that's pretty low end. So actually there's a lot of value add in the semiconductor manufacturing process. And it's very, very difficult, as we can see here, to manufacture the most advanced node in semiconductor. So a lot of the nodes that we are the most advanced nodes that we're on now, 5 nanometer, it's really smaller than even a virus. So that's the type of scale that we are operating, that we're manufacturing now. So it's in the advanced semiconductor manufacturing is really a very, very difficult process and very, very difficult technology. And Asia semiconductor companies are adding a lot of value here by enabling design companies to manufacture at these nodes and enable this type of transistor density to deliver the performance that they need. And next, we'll talk a little bit about the sort of relationship between AI and also the impact to Metaverse, right? So I think Metaverse has been a sort of, it was widely discussed last year, and then it's cooled off a little bit this year. But we think there's a very close relationship between AI and Metaverse and how it can enable Metaverse to continue to develop. So a lot of the applications that we think about in Metaverse, really, first of all, a much more immersive virtual world. And if you think about that, you really have to interact with a lot of agents, avatar, and different types of agent in this virtual world, right? And to enable the much more realistic, much better performance of these agents, it has to be using AI techniques. So we think in the early days of Metaverse, a lot of the construction of these avatar, the performance of this avatar and the interaction will not be as ideal and as what people were expecting. But I think over time, as we adopt more AI technique into the development of these environment, into these games and software and these avatar and different types of application, AI will enable the applications and the interaction in the metaverse to be much more realistic, right? So one example I can talk to is if we look at the Apple Vision Pro, so the latest MR headset that Apple launched this week. One of the application is to have a sort of lifelike FaceTime call in the headset. Essentially, you have a much more 3D call. So the call we're doing right now it's a sort of 2D because we only have a camera that captures my face and it's shown on a 2D screen. And so with the latest Vision Pro, they're actually able to leverage AI models to essentially reconstruct your face on a FaceTime call. So they're not really showing the instant real image of the person, but instead they're using the AI models to essentially guess and reconstruct a 3D model of the person. And then by capturing the facial expressions and eye movements and all of that of the person, you're able to almost recreate a 3D person in the chat. So in terms of hardware and then a lot of the hardware and a lot of the applications that Apple does, AI is actually already embedded in the development in a lot of the technologies in the background. But oftentimes we don't really realize that because they've integrated quite seamlessly into the product. So I think you can see that in a lot of the metaverse development. So all these different types of software and new applications, things like your reconstruction of sort of instant 3D FaceTime applications, things like that. Actually, AI is enabling a lot of these new applications in VR, so in the metaverse as well. So I think over time, different experience will get improved quite significantly by the adoption of AI techniques in the metaverse, and that will really help the development as well. So just in terms of why this sort of more active approach in the metaverse, given that now at the early stage of development, really, whether it's AI or metaverse, it's there are many different companies, and it's sometimes hard to sort of track which company does well in the process. But doing active, you're able to sort of identify the stages that the industry is in, and really how to be best positioned to invest in this trend, right? So for AI, for instance, we talked about how initially all the companies have to invest in the infrastructure, essentially in semiconductor, and then later on you move on to your applications, and once you get a platform, something like an Apple Vision Pro, and once that platform really takes off, and when the shipment of that hardware penetrates into many more users, and then your software and development and all those application players are able to benefit from that. So I think for a new industry where it has to go through different cycles and different waves of development, you have to sort of follow it closely with the active approach. So I think that's it from me today. Thank you.